Welcome back into the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where, like Jordon Hudson, we're not talking about how any of us met. I'm Brendon Kleen, a staff writer at Awful Announcing. That's Ben Axelrod, as always, a senior editor at Awful Announcing. We are joined for the very first time by our fellow Awful Announcing teammate, Sam Neumann. How are you doing today, Sam?
I'm good, guys. Appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to, this being my first time on.
We got a lot of things in your wheelhouse that you have been covering for the site, so we figured why not? It is a little bit of a chaotic episode, I would say, for you to make your triumphant debut here. But we have Shannon Sharpe speeding through an ugly legal battle. Robert Griffin III is back on TV, but first, our instant replay for the week. Shedeur Sanders takes over the NFL draft despite falling and really underperforming what we all thought he would do in that draft, from a top 10 first-round pick possibility to the fifth round. There are a lot of places I feel like we will go here on the draft, Ben, but I guess have you heard a take on the Shedeur thing that you think is the best one? Have you solidified in your head how you will remember what happened here, especially considering that your team is the one that ended up with the guy?
100%. Actually, it was kind of a weird experience for me in general, just following this even before the Browns took Shedeur on Saturday. I was catching up on the Bill Simmons podcast, which I always fall behind. I'm like 2 episodes behind on Bill Simmons every time. And so his midweek podcast last week, he had Peter Schrager on. And so I'm listening to this on Friday, knowing that Shedeur fell out of the first round at a minimum, not knowing how any of this is going to shake out. And Peter Schrager's stance on all of this was like, we don't really know what to make of Shedeur Sanders' draft stock because of how connected Dion is to the media. Like, it's much easier for media members to just kind of go along with the idea that, yeah, he's a first round pick. Even if he's not the number 2 or number 3 overall pick, he's somewhere between the Saints at 9 and the Steelers at 21. Yeah. And, there's some people who disagreed with that. I think Todd McShay was probably on the more negative side when it came to Shedeur, but that was Peter Schrager's whole take, was like, we don't really know like what to make of any of this because everybody's kind of treating Shedeur with kid gloves because they like Dion so much. And it was a total media creation, but I think it was somewhere between a media creation and people not knowing how to truly evaluate this prospect, who so much of his hype and so much of what people like about him is, in part because they like Dion. I think that's ultimately what I'll remember, is listening to Peter Schrager on Friday, something he said 3 days prior, and just realizing like how clairvoyant it wound up being, because that's ultimately how it played out.
Yeah, it felt like we started to, like, I know Diana Rossini did a bunch of hits on Thursday morning and daytime before the draft actually started, and she sort of started to sound the alarm on this as well. She basically said, I think in a few different places, Shedeur wasn't going to the Giants, and that she didn't think he was going to be a first-round pick likely, and that she just was basically starting to get my wheels turning on, like, her saying, I'm not sure what team actually likes him, actually values him highly enough for this to go the way that a lot of us have been expecting that it'll go. But Sam, like, the other part of me that, like, even I was going to ask Ben, but I'll just throw it to you. Like, with the Browns sitting at 2, like, NFL history sort of just tells us, like, somebody's going to take him. And I feel like the part of this that, I mean, maybe just because once it gets to round 5, it's old news, but the part of this that I think was especially crazy is Jackson Dart going in the first round. And the desperation for quarterback side of it not even being enough to outweigh all the nonsense that happened around Shedeur through the pre-draft process, which we can all agree on, and we've heard a lot of media takes, and I think Ben's from Schrager is a good one. Like, usually that still just ends up with somebody being desperate enough for that position to just say, fuck it, let's take the guy because we need that. We all need one of those, right? But it didn't happen that way.
Yeah, I think what really, I guess, kind of just opened my eyes a little bit is when Boomer Esiason yesterday said, "Hey, these owners just came in and said, take him off the draft board. We don't want him." And I think at the end of the day, what you're looking at here is teams kind of just viewed Shedeur as a backup quarterback. And then on top of that, you have what Boomer said. And do you really want the distraction with the backup quarterback? Now, we can argue the semantics about whether Shedeur would actually be a distraction. I mean, that's a big piece of it, but also at the same time, like, what I'm kind of curious about is we talk about the relationship that Dion has with the NFL, but there's also people at the same time who were saying that Dion was getting fed bad information by teams that, his son was going to be drafted so highly. That's a piece that's curious to me is like, was Dion being fed bad information, or was he just trying to hype up his son as much as he could? I thought the media coverage, I thought Matt Yoder for us at Awful Announcing wrote a good piece about how everybody just kind of missed out on it. But yeah, like you said, Brendon, you kind of just assume that a team is not dumb enough, but just, why not throw a bone at Shedeur and see what can happen? We know this is a quarterback needy league. The Jets went and grabbed Aaron Rodgers. So anything can happen, but
Dylan Gabriel goes ahead of, you know what I mean? Like it's
Milroe
like
too.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Milroe and Chuck and everybody went before him. But it was a little bit eye-opening to me too, Ben, how much it like reinforced in a bad way how much the pre-draft process actually matters to these teams. Mm-hmm. That was what was crazy, because there was another kind of part of the thing that I was most intrigued by to give my answer to my own question was after the whispers this week have been sort of that it was almost hard to get a read on how Shedeur was in the building and around the other people there, because everything was so Dion centered and all of the noise there filters through Dion. It's been crafted by Dion. And of course, his son, if media people who like Dion aren't even going to say a bad thing about him or his family, well, the people who literally work for him right now, of course, they aren't going to, in the same way that you might be able to get some intel about a Dart or a Cam Ward in a better way. But as much as that can make sense to me, it's crazy that this stuff from, January through April matters so much. And in some ways almost feels like it matters more than September to January for these teams.
Yeah, and that's like, I don't know how, looking a year out now, because like you said, I follow the Browns, and the Browns are going to be picking within the top 3 picks, probably number 1 overall next year. And like, you're trying to look at which quarterbacks are going to be available. Like, I don't even know like what to look for anymore on the field in terms of like what is appealing to these teams. Like Drew Aller right now at Penn State is I think, presumptive number 1 overall pick. I've watched Drew Aller through a lot of his career at Penn State. Like, that does not look like a number 1 overall pick.
The same thing at ASU for Sam Levitt. I'm seeing him as a top 10 projected pick, and I'm like, he's fine. I'd never in a million years would have thought last season, even in a breakout year for that program and him leading the way at a pretty young age, that he'd be up there. And that's why I say it like, obviously, it's not news that the pre-draft process matters. It's a huge spectacle, but it's so susceptible to these types of narratives and media things taking over, where these teams spend so much money on scouts and personnel evaluators and all this stuff, and then the whispers through the grapevine and looking at whatever Todd McShay has on his Beehive newsletter somehow affects this stuff on a huge level. Like, one of my questions was, do we think this will have any impact on how like fans or anyone kind of looks at mock drafts, or is this could just be a one-off because there was so much noise and so much unique to Shedeur?
I think the latter. I think this is pretty unique to Shedeur, but I also think like the cliche is all it takes is one, right? All it takes is one team to take a guy and then he's off the board. And we found out what happens like when there is none. And so like, in theory, this could have happened with Tim Tebow. Like, the Broncos took him, but what if the Broncos didn't take him? Maybe he would have had a similar fall. Then you fall to the second round. Every team that needs a quarterback already has a quarterback. And then you're getting into, well, do we want to use a second or third round pick on a guy who we think might be a distraction when we know we're bringing him in as a backup? So like, I also think quarterback is just so unique in the sense that you typically only have 3 of them on your roster. You're trying to support the guy who's your starting quarterback. Sometimes you have a guy who you're already projecting as your future quarterback, and to just bring in Shedeur, like it almost makes the most sense what the Browns did, where you bring him in as I can't believe I just said that the Browns did something sensible, but like where you bring him in as a 5th round pick, and then you do kind of lessen that media circus because there's less of an expectation that he is going to be a starter. And you also know they could just cut him like willy-nilly out of nowhere. So I don't know. I do think this is unique, but I also do think like when we do get to these prospects, because Shedeur is not going to be the last kind of prospect like this. I could name, like I said, Tebow, Johnny Manziel, all these guys who.
The reason I ask is I was kind of thinking about this because I always go back to basketball. Like, what if Bronny hadn't had the cardiac episode? And if you think back, Jonathan Givony, who's the draft Nick guy for the NBA side at ESPN, his first mock for the 2025 or 2024 draft class had Bronny as a top 10 pick, and that was a kind of a joke at the time. And then he has the his heart stops and whatever, and he obviously has a rough year at USC and everything else. But if he had actually played well and played a lot, that would have been very similar. But I'm also thinking of Arch Manning this upcoming year, right? Like, how is that, Sam, going to take shape? And will we kind of be back in this place? And are there, like, can we learn, like, will we learn the lessons of not overhyping these guys? I mean, it all depends on how he plays, but those are just kind of, that's where my head's at.
Yeah, but before we get to Arch, there's just one point about the pre-draft process that I wanted to make. I think what people are kind of not paying attention to here is that Dion really dictated what Shedeur was doing in that pre-draft process, which teams he interviewed with, which bowl games he played in, which if he threw at the combine or not. And I think that rubbed teams the wrong way. And then when you have a set amount of teams that you would interview with and you seemingly blow those interviews, I mean, that really just limits the amount of teams that really want to draft him. So I think that's what makes Shedeur's situation so unique. And I think it might be a telltale sign to be like, hey, maybe we shouldn't just limit ourselves to these teams that we meet with. I mean, Eli Manning, I don't remember totally what happened, but he forced his way out of the Chargers. But I doubt he did where I'm not meeting with them in the pre-draft process, all that, whatever. So setting these kind of rules of engagement, I think, is the part here where that'll stand out. And I don't know if we'll see that from future quarterbacks, and maybe we'll see it from Arch though. To transition to that, I saw today that Arch still has 3 years of eligibility today remaining, and Eli and Peyton both exhausted all of their eligibility. I don't know how we're already on Arch Manning being the number 1 prospect, the number 1 quarterback prospect when he hasn't played a meaningful snap. I mean, the meaningful
snaps. You didn't like those red zone rushing attempts last year? Those were pretty exciting.
What are the meaningful snaps he played was in that if I'm mistaken, I don't know, if the Georgia game that he came in for Quinn Ewers and just did not look like a college quarterback quite yet. Granted, I mean, anybody that you throw in at halftime against Georgia, that's probably going to happen. But yeah, I think the Shedeur thing kind of jumped the shark, and I feel like the minute that Arch starts playing well, we're going to be in that same boat. But the thing is, the NFL media cycle kind of has this right now to where, like, do we know if he's going to come out? Is he going to come out? And if not, we have no idea if he's going to come out or not. So they can keep just beating that home that maybe Arch is the top draft prospect. But like I said, and maybe to wrap this all up, put a bow on it, I mean, just, the rules of engagement being different from Shedeur is what I think kind of separates it from Manziel and Tebow and everything like that. And why I think teams that, the limited amount of teams that met with him were willing to let him pass by. I mean, the Browns met with him and they let, what was it, 4 or 5 picks that they had of their own before they finally took
6.
Sanders, and 6. And then they took a quarterback over him too. So
yeah. Yeah, I think the other part of the very manicured process for Shedeur that is funny now is that his brother hired an agent instead of using their dad, and his brother's not even a guy that we thought would get drafted and didn't get drafted. But
I did
I
feel
think that
bad for Shiloh throughout the weekend a little bit.
he was being a champ with the fall for Shedeur and some of those clips, just pumping his
Yeah.
brother up and kind of making light of it and whatever. I almost feel like Shiloh's like, I have nothing to lose. What do I care? I'm gonna be on the phone with somebody on Sunday afternoon, one way or another, so I can just kind of cruise here. I'm not waiting on the call. But the other part of this that, of course, from our side of things, took everybody by storm was Mel Kiper, and he I will say he made headlines. He was viral all weekend for his very over the top determination and defense of Shedeur. I will say it's a little funny. He did have Shedeur over Cam Ward, which was a bold thing to do, and at least allowed him to stake his claim to being the most pro Shedeur of anybody on TV. But he was also 5th overall, which I just kind of found funny. He's like, I'm going to go crazy on TV for 4 days about a guy that wasn't actually even the best in the class total, but he just was the best quarterback. Sam, you wrote about this for the site, though. Was Kiper's performance, his act, his whatever, good or bad for him in ESPN? What do you think?
I mean, can it be both? I penned a column about how I thought vintage Kiper on Friday night was great. I thought Kiper was excellent on Friday night. You got kind of some of the theatrics, but also the analysis of how he was disgusted with the NFL. And I mean, regardless of what you feel about Shedeur, he probably should have been drafted in the 2nd or 3rd round. I think we can probably come to that conclusion. But he sandwiched that in between Thursday and Saturday. And Thursday was the Shedeur Sanders show, even though I mean, not how many teams had a 3rd round grade on him? I don't know if we know that answer, but not many apparently. And then Saturday just kind of became like an airing of grievances for him, where he was, Reese Davis was ready to lock horns with him on set and really finally put him in his place. And then Mel said he was kind of unfazed by the criticism. I think this is just who Mel is, but I think it was just so put on like almost steroids just because of the fall of Shedeur. Like if he gets drafted in the 2nd or 3rd round, we don't have that Saturday, and maybe the fireworks that made everybody talk about Shedeur, made everybody talk about Mel, don't happen if Shedeur gets taken in day 2. I thought personally, if you're talking about, okay, we want eyeballs on this, the ratings are good, we need a story here because Cam, for one reason or another, they didn't really want to cover Cam Ward as the number 1 overall pick. It's good from that standpoint. I think from the standpoint of when you have the average fan doesn't want to hear about Shedeur Sanders. They don't want to hear about what Mel Kiper's evaluation is and how it misses the mark. And I think Nick Wright made a good point. It was basically like his evaluation is so off base from what the rest of the league thinks. Like, how can you think that makes good TV? I think some of it was good TV. I think some of it was not good TV. And I think we kind of saw the reaction. People are like, how is ESPN going to put Mel Kiper? Well, they're going to back on TV. They're going to put him back on TV. He'll be back next year for the draft. This guy lives, sleeps, breathes football. But I think it was just double parts, like equally good and equally bad, just because it just kind of became a caricature of itself by the time we got to day 3.
Agreed. And I think that the problem became is he wasn't confronting reality, right? Like that's where Reese Davis got just fed up, and Louis Riddick kind of just had to shut him down. I mean, at that point, Shedeur had just been drafted and it was the end of the saga, but they were basically trying to just plead with him. Like I think what was one of the two of them said the draft has spoken. Like that's what happened. Like,
that was Louis Riddick, I think.
Yeah, and it felt as if Kiper was back on Thursday all weekend, still trying to almost like give his take on Shedeur sliding from 9 to 31 or something, and in this case it was like, well, the conversation now is why did the slide happen and what happens next, not why everybody that works in every NFL front office is actually just a huge fucking moron, which is kind of what Kiper was making the case for. So it's not good TV when you piss off your coworkers, I don't think, and you have that kind of a moment go viral. But Ben, it makes me think of my hot mic from last week where I did praise Mel for, I think, understand, like, he was the perfect guy to have on this story, because I think that he's the only one that had the stamina to see it through to the very long conclusion that it ended up taking. And it was the biggest story of this draft, whether that's exhausting for all of us to have to watch over and over or not. It was the biggest story, and he uniquely ended up becoming the perfect kind of voice for it. What would they have even talked about with regard to the Shedeur slide if he wasn't on TV? That was what I was wondering.
And I think at this point in Mel's career, he's almost more of like a mascot than he is an analyst. Like, maybe mascot's not right, more of a personality than he is an analyst. Because ESPN employs 5 people who cover the NFL draft on a full-time basis, 4 people who cover the draft on a full-time basis. And I think,
then like 10 more who are there anyway.
Yeah. And like, I think when it comes to mock drafts, and like, Sam, you follow this stuff, pretty closely. When it comes to the ESPN guys who come out with mock drafts on a regular basis, I think that Mel's like trails behind like Field Yates and Jordan Reed's and Peter Schrager's annual one, which is, sourced with teams of where these guys are going to go. Like, I don't think people turn to Mel for who is going to be the best quarterback in this draft, who's the steal at running back. Like, they turn to Mel for the bravado and for the personality and for the opinions. And this was the perfect story to give you this. Now, it felt like he was crashing out throughout the weekend. Like, it was very, at one point on Thursday, which was only 1/3 of the way through this whole thing, like, him and Louis Riddick were basically sulking on stage about Shedeur having not been picked yet. And we were only at like pick 21 at that point. And I also thought, like, his barb about like the NFL has sucked at evaluating quarterbacks for 20 years. It's like, okay, but like, what about when they hit on Joe Burrow? What about when they hit on Peyton Manning? Like, the guys who typically go high in the draft hit at a pretty high clip, I would think.
Well, and it's a hard thing to say when we understand the whole idea of evaluating quarterbacks is kind of a fool's errand, but that also applies to Mel Kiper.
Right.
Right? It's like they kept flashing the graphic of the people that he had been higher on and where they went and all that throughout the weekend. Like, that could be our Kyle Hamilton of the week, Ben, is just put that graphic on the screen, because we all saw it 150 times. But there's
Mel's best available.
Yeah, but it's like we're seeing on that list like Jimmy Clausen and Blaine Gabbert and some of these names. It's like, well, you've also sucked at evaluating quarterbacks for 40 years, dude. You don't get to throw that at people if you're included in the list of those who it's hard for.
Yeah, and this slide in particular is pretty unprecedented. Like, I can't imagine there are many Saturdays we've had where Mel Kiper's number 5 overall player is still sitting atop Mel's big board. But like, I mean, I think the closest is like Malik Willis when he fell a couple of years ago to the 3rd round, or Sam Howell when he fell to the 5th round, or Matt Corral. And the league is always right. Like, the league is always right when these guys fall. There's never one of these guys who falls. And it's like, obviously there's Aaron Rodgers in like to pick 24. Tom Brady wasn't anywhere in this conversation, but like,
exactly. Brady wasn't one where on draft night, everybody was wondering what was going on. I mean, maybe he could have gone a round or 2 earlier, but everybody likes to say the Patriots passed on him a half dozen times too. Yeah. So that's not even a good example. That was just a fluke.
Yeah. So maybe this works out for the Browns or somebody else. And maybe like this gets to be like the final feather in Mel's cap, and that like he always gets to lay claim to this. But I think history would say that's probably not going to happen. But to your original question, like, I do think this was almost the perfect story for him to showcase his personality, which I think is largely what his role is now when it comes to the NFL draft.
So yeah, last thing then, and this is where I wanted to close, because I had the newsletter for Awful Announcing on Sunday night, and I wanted to stop short of like calling for his job or being dramatic or anything like that. But the note that I closed my little column in the first part of the newsletter on was, if ESPN wanted to demote or in some way sideline Mel from the main desk on ESPN, it wouldn't exactly be hard to do. right? They have so many people. I mean, you just mentioned how many people write articles that are mock drafts on ESPN.com at this point? 5? I mean, Matt Miller, we didn't mention. I believe he writes one. Schrager, Reed, and Mel. Is that and
Field
and
Yates? Yeah.
So that's 5 people.
Solak does some NFL draft stuff too, I
And
believe.
Solak probably is coming not
Yeah.
far behind to be part of this. Yeah, I'm sure he would love to because that's what he made his bones doing when he was coming up. So I think it wouldn't be hard, but I do come back to whatever mascot, caricature, whatever we want to call what Mel does, it's hard to replicate. And I do think, like, as I said, it would have been at least a drier draft broadcast if he wasn't on it. You know what I mean? And is there anyone who can? I understand you're talking history, you're talking like a legend of media, but like, is there anyone even temperamentally and stylistically on TV who can come close? Like that's just as big of a factor, even if he kind of embarrassed himself a time or two this weekend.
Yeah, like you said, and there's not really anybody that comes close. And if you want to point somebody that comes close with that bombastic style, maybe Stephen A. But like, I feel like a lot of people already feel Stephen A. is overextended when he talks NFL.
Can't
So
do the draft.
But the one, yeah, I agree.
Break it
The
down,
one point
guard play.
God.
the one point I wanted to make is ESPN never really felt like they properly replaced Todd McShay as like Mel's heel on the draft coverage. Like we saw Reese Davis and Louis Riddick trying to bring him back to earth, but they kind of just let him have at it. And at least when McShay would be on the coverage, he would throw it right back at Mel. And I just don't think they have that anymore. And I don't really know if you can just bring in a guy to be Mel's heel and have that seem like it's authentic.
You can't replicate the relationship. You can't,
exactly.
They had all those years together to develop that. You can't just say, all right, Kevin Clark is your new opponent. Yell at him. You know, that's not how it works.
Well, it's not first take.
Exactly.
They need to find a way to get Schrager on that main stage one way or another. He crushed it on the McAfee show, the live stream, and just like the he has like a little nugget prepared for each player. Like you can tell he seeks out, like, I'm going to be on with McAfee, give me a story, and he has the story ready. And it's like, in and of itself, it might not be a big deal, but when you add them all together, it creates this experience where you're waiting for each nugget after each pick. And so, like, even McAfee said it on Friday, like, he couldn't believe Schrager was available to them. And I think he's going to find himself on that main stage sooner rather than later. So it's just a matter of like how they rearrange the talent to make that work.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating that Traeger was partnered with Schefter for, I think, days 2 and 3, and they did an interview with the Jacksonville GM together. And I know we had talked when Schrager got hired, Ben, about is he quite going to be in the insider lane? Or I had said, like, who's the most pissed off in the ESPN buildings that he's overtaking them? And, you know, was it going to be more of like Jeremy Fowler and Jeff Darlington or whatever? Or is it going to be more of like Kevin Clark and the, you know, more personality driven people? And it seems like it's all of them that he's just completely steamrolled here. But
it's all of them and it's none of them.
Yeah. There's more than enough airtime to go around and more than enough opportunities. But at the same time, my other one, I think Field Yates was great on the game day desk, and I thought he's clearly sees this as a lane for himself now. Maybe since McShay left or whatever you want to point to, but he feels like he's done the fantasy stuff for so long. He's just been in the world. I think he has a nice understanding similar to some of the people we're talking about, where he's a little granular, maybe more than some, but he gets like a bunch of football geeks are watching the draft. Like make it for them, you know?
He's also going after Mel with the hair, it seems like.
Yeah, he's even gone another inch or two longer than he used to. Shout out to Field Yates as a fellow long-haired person. I can respect it. All right, let's get into it. Shannon Sharpe on hiatus from ESPN as the legal battle, at least here on Tuesday afternoon. We've maybe seen one headline about it today as opposed to the 8 to 10 we were getting on a daily basis last week. I think we can just start from the beginning, Ben, where last week we kind of made the decision to let it play out a little bit, but it started Easter night where a woman with whom Sharpe apparently has been in a relationship for about a year and a half filed a lawsuit accusing him, I should say, of sexual assault and a lot of awful things, including non-consensual recording of their sexual encounters and all this sort of stuff. He immediately snaps into action with a very prominent lawyer, calling it a shakedown, blackmail, etc. Her legal team responds by basically releasing what it thinks is proof of this, a bunch of recordings of them, mostly Shannon, being pretty violent and aggressive in the way that he's talking to this woman, and he releases text messages in return. I guess the strategy being that he wants to show that this was kind of par for the course and they were a little kinky and weird with how they, interacted, and that was normal for them, not necessarily evidence of malpractice and anything illegal or criminal on his part. And by the week's end, we had Stephen A. basically giving the green light to ESPN to suspend him, and then, depending on which direction you might believe it came from, Shannon screenshotting a received statement from his legal team and saying that he will not be appearing on ESPN through at least August. Now, at the same time, he did then do a live show from the draft, and he appears to be business as usual with his own properties. And that's kind of where we're at. We haven't seen a lot of new info for the past few days at this point, Ben, but what about this is standing out to you? It feels like to me there's a world where a different legal strategy on his part, and he was on First Take this morning.
Yeah, that's probably where I would go, is his strategy, I think, in all of this. And I think also how ESPN handled it and what it says about the current strategy at ESPN in terms of how it deals with its biggest names. So Shannon's on First Take on Monday, the day after the allegations came out. I thought that was okay. I don't think you can't pull people for every lawsuit they face. I mean, ultimately, you do have a right to defend yourself, even as heinous as these allegations were. There was no evidence out there at this point on last Monday. Come Tuesday,
it seems like the lawsuit had been filed on Sunday night, but news broke of it almost during or right as First Take was starting. So that was a hard one to avoid.
Yeah, so I was traveling back from WrestleMania at that point, so the timeline's a little iffy for me there. I do know that Tuesday, I couldn't believe ESPN had him on, because by that point, you had both sides litigating this publicly with evidence that included screenshots, voice recordings. Obviously, all of the content within both is just like graphic in nature and sexual and lewd. And so then you get to this point where Tuesday on First Take I'll never forget it, at 11:40 a.m. Eastern time on First Take, Shannon is on First Take, and TMZ has the story that it has the audio of him threatening to choke her. And there's Shannon sitting on First Take. And then
talking about nonsense.
Yeah, arguing about Pistons Knicks, like just crazy. And then a couple hours later, you have the press conference with the lawyer where he admits that they had offered at least $10 million in a settlement. Obviously, that's not an admission of guilt. But as Mike Florio pointed out, like, it is tough to square this ardent defense with you having offered $10 million to have made this go away already. And so I agree. Had they kept this all private, or I guess, I don't know. If the accuser is still coming out with voicemails and stuff, maybe it's a different story, but it did feel like some of those were in retaliation to Shannon releasing her name and releasing the screenshots of their text messages. So you just had a clusterfuck, and I couldn't believe that ESPN allowed this to go on their airwaves, knowing that this back and forth was still going on in the background. And then in terms of how ESPN handles it, the fact that it took until Thursday for Shannon to step down from his First Take role, or his ESPN role, I just can't believe that with all the evidence that had already been out there throughout the previous 3 days, there is not another world where ESPN would have taken this long when it comes to, lesser stars. And I do think, like, look, they aren't great messengers, but I think like people like Sage Steele calling hypocrisy for the stuff that they were pulled from the air
Totally
from,
justified.
totally valid. Sage Steele got pulled for comments about COVID, comments about Barack Obama. And like, yeah, that might've been the right decision. But if that met the threshold for whatever threshold ESPN has for pulling talent from air, you would have to think that this Shannon Sharpe public legal battle would also do the same in terms of not wanting this on a Disney-owned network. So I just think, the way that ESPN handled it, I really thought they fumbled it last week. And it's going to be really interesting to see like where it goes from here, because I'd be really surprised at this point if we ever see Shannon as an ESPN personality in the foreseeable future.
100% agree. The fact that it started at 4 months is not normal, right? A 2-week slap on the wrist or something might have been more in line with historical norms over there, or just in a lot of these situations. And 4 months is a lot. I understand Shannon is a former NFL player, and so him being on for NFL season is the most important thing. But still, that's a long hiatus to agree to on the front end. The valuation of Shannon, Sam, to me, from start to finish, now that was only 4 days, start to finish, I get, but on the part of ESPN is bonkers to me, because it's not that he's not a very noteworthy and talented analyst. Like, I get the appeal. But originally, when he signed on to First Take after he got let go by FS1, it was understood like maybe he's the heir apparent to Stephen A. We didn't know what the next contract would look like for Stephen A. Even Stephen A. teased that at one point, like he could take over the show. I always thought it was a little funny because I think they're about the same age. It's like, it's not like your protege here. I mean, Shannon might even be a little older. I don't know, but and now the reports come out that Shannon makes like $6.5 million there for 2 appearances on First Take. So it's crazy that they would pay him that much, to me, even separating that from the legal stuff now going on. And it's crazy that they would be so deferential to letting the first few steps of this legal situation play out in public before they made a move on how to handle him. What did you think of the fallout side of it? Because again, we're not going to comb through this lawsuit and try to play right and wrong here, but that part of it is definitely in our wheelhouse, and I would say very different than how most of these things play out.
Well, it kind of just left you scratching your head why they would leave somebody on air who's on air for 4 hours a week. I think Andrew Marchand was the one from The Athletic was the one who really hammered that point home. Was Shannon Sharpe, as valuable as you want to make him to ESPN, he's on the airways for 4 hours a week. And even if Monday, okay, that's whatever. Tuesday, there's only 2 hours left in the week. You didn't even have to say we're taking him off the show. He could have just not been on. I mean, granted, we would have all concluded why that would happen, but at the same time, like the week that they're having him leading up to the NFL draft, it's not like Shannon Sharpe is an NFL draft expert either. And everybody on Tuesday is like, okay, the draft. And what did we just talk about the segment before? How many NFL draft guys the ESPN has in their Rolodex? It wouldn't have been that hard to have inserted. Obviously, that's kind of beside the point, but it almost just felt like why are we doing, like, what are we doing here? Like, regardless of how you feel about Shannon Sharpe, and obviously you will allow the legalities and the details to play out, it just felt like something that ESPN did not need to let happen. And I feel like Stephen A. even kind of alluded to that on the Monday episode of his podcast, and then Shannon Sharpe's there on Tuesday. So it kind of just seemed like an own goal. That was avoidable.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
It made me wonder, and that gets us to what Stephen A. ended up saying. And obviously he has a prominent level of control over First Take creatively at this point, and it's no secret that he directly was probably the one who at least, said Shannon meet Jimmy Pitaro, Jimmy meet Shannon, if nothing else. Is it crazy to say that ESPN was waiting for Stephen A. to give the green light on this? Because The podcast response, it was crazy to listen to, where Stephen A is almost like Trojan horsing an official corporate statement on behalf of ESPN through his independent podcast. It's almost like there's more of a leeway given for Stephen A to be more specific and direct addressing this kind of thing because it was independent. But for the first time ever on that show, I found myself very much feeling like Stephen A. Smith was an ESPN employee, which he goes to great lengths most of the time to not seem like that's the case when he's talking on the podcast. And then all of a sudden things move pretty quickly from there, and suddenly Shannon's not on the show anymore. I don't know. Like, it feels like that would be a crazy thing to say, Ben, but that's what it felt like, is that somebody higher up at ESPN almost wanted to see how Stephen A felt about it, and he had to send the message to, like, tell them it was all good with him if Shannon got suspended.
Well, I mean, if we are in this star era of ESPN where their stars have more power than ever before, Stephen A. Smith is their biggest star, at least in terms of what they're paying him. Like, his contract dictates that he is their biggest star based on what he's making there. And so I don't know if I would go as far as to say like they were waiting for his green light, but Shannon's leverage, because we just talked about a few minutes ago, like how does Shannon Sharpe of all people like have all this power? Like, Shannon Sharpe is fairly replaceable in terms of what he does, you know, speaking for 4 hours a day on a debate show. His leverage comes from the fact that that's who Stephen A. Smith wants to be doing the show with. Like, this is Stephen A. Smith's handpicked partner. This is somebody who's willing to hand the show off to. This is somebody who, whatever is going on with his relationship with Skip Bayless, clearly plays a role in all of that. Somebody who has helped First Take achieve, you know, higher heights than it's ever achieved before. Like, that's not nothing like that. And so I think it might be a little far to say they were waiting for his green light, but I don't think Stephen A. Smith's opinion in all of this is irrelevant. Like, I think probably the way ESPN operates and the way it seems like Jimmy Pitaro operates is they want to collaborate with their stars. And I would imagine there was a lot of collaboration and discussions with Stephen A. Smith, which is probably which is probably why it came off like, which is absolutely how it came off, is that they are laundering Jimmy Pitaro's statement through Stephen A. Smith's independent podcast, because that's like probably how these discussions actually took place.
Yeah, it almost for the first time like revealed this kind of secondary value of ESPN operating this way lately, in probably only this case, because Stephen A. is the only person with whom they have this type of more increasingly independent relationship, who also is very much a company man. He started there and earned the independence versus coming in the back door with the independence built in, like McAfee or Peyton or Barkley coming up, or people like Shannon and whatever. But it was almost like you saw the value to ESPN of having that megaphone to the world that is the Stephen A. Smith show with iHeartMedia and whatever else. Like, it flipped that relationship in a way that I almost felt like benefited ESPN, because they can't release a statement or have Jimmy Pitaro do an interview with Andrew Marchand or something that's so specific, where he's saying, I don't really love them releasing the tapes, and I think Shannon's being a little inappropriate, and I understand him, bringing race and bringing some of these things into it, but it doesn't exactly fit with the other examples he's giving, the way that Shannon thinks it fits, and all this sort of stuff that Stephen A. said. The corporate suits at ESPN can't talk that way. But if Pitaro and Stephen A. have a phone call for 45 minutes right before he sits down to record, they sort of can. You know what I mean? And so it was super fascinating, but I think it's definitely more evidence of, I don't know how these contracts and things work, but it does feel like there is a little bit to it also of, it's different now to have, Sage Steele was an employee, and even then ESPN overstepped because she won a lawsuit against them. But it's probably even harder when it's this sort of freelance arrangement that's not so concretely spelled out. I would imagine the rules around how you suspend without pay or fine an employee or any sort of that stuff. I would imagine that's harder if it's not somebody who's a W-2 employee with you or whatever we want to say. Like, I don't know, but that jumped out to me as well. And it's probably going to continue to be an issue for them if they keep bringing in prominent talent under this kind of arrangement. Sam, any last thoughts on this before we jump to Robert Griffin?
Real quick, Sage settled her lawsuit. She didn't win it.
Okay.
Just for
clarification.
Just for legal purposes.
Yes.
Yeah, the last point that I just wanted to make is I thought even more telling than Stephen A's interview on Monday or podcast on Monday was his podcast at the end of the week where he basically blasted Shannon's kind of how they were going about it legally. I mean, I wrote the story on it, and he pretty much came from the point of view that why is some of that information being let out in public? I thought it was just notable that he, after kind of grandstanding and standing and saying, hey, like, I believe in Shannon Sharpe. We had a conversation on the phone, and I don't believe any of these allegations or what is being alleged. But at the same time, I can't believe what he is putting out there, it being advised by his lawyer. Like, he bluntly and plainly kind of said, like, he thought his lawyer was doing a shit job. I mean, that's pretty much what Stephen A was saying. And then he kind of came from it from the standpoint of like the situation that Shannon puts ESPN in by making all of that, airing all of that dirty laundry out there, so to speak. And I thought it was just kind of interesting how he said that ESPN and Disney kind of have that wait and see attitude, wait and see approach. And maybe that's kind of played into Tuesday. But then once he started, those text messages started getting released, the audio, it was no longer, we can't wait and see anymore. So for obviously, I don't think Stephen A is speaking for ESPN in that standpoint, but I thought it was just kind of incredible that he would just go and tear into somebody that he considers a close friend, potential protege, and just say, yeah, your lawyer's doing a terrible job, man.
And again, I don't necessarily want to make it seem like I think he's speaking for ESPN, but I guess what I would say is I don't think Stephen A would say anything about a situation that tense if he didn't think it was okay with ESPN. Mm-hmm. That's probably how I would put it, and we'll never know the exact intricacies there, but ESPN finally released a statement through the media. I don't even know if they emailed it out or anything once Shannon officially stepped away, saying we agree with Shannon's decision. Basically, that's it. Not really any more detail than that. And I think at this point, it's just a matter of how this civil suit proceeds. The dares from Shannon to release the full tape that this woman's legal team seems to have not come to pass. That video has not been released. Thank God. I don't think any of us really need to have this turn to that. But I don't know what is going to come next. It feels like Shannon, given that he already offered $10 million, is probably pretty motivated to settle here, but I don't know what that will mean as far as his next podcast deal, which we didn't even have time to ever talk about, Ben, because it immediately was followed by this, but he's also pursuing, he left the volume. He wants to get a big bag for his media properties, and I don't know what that means. This means for that, and I don't know what a settlement, how these companies would take that either, but it's been ugly, and I tend to agree with Ben that it just doesn't, right now, from everything we know, seem like it's worth the headache for ESPN to bring somebody on to yell about football twice a week for all of this baggage. All right, finally, Robert Griffin III takes over for Brock. I'm going to need a help on his last name. How do we pronounce this gentleman's last name?
Huard.
Huard?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Who left to coach his son's high school football team, may or may not have been totally his call there. That seems, it raised our eyebrows at awful announcing, I'll say, and they were on the hunt for a new number 2 behind Joel Klatt over there for their college football game analyst roster. And so Robert Griffin takes it, Sam, and tucked into the report when this first came out, which I think was last week, a while ago at this point, was that Dan Orlovsky was also offered this role and apparently was not all that interested in it. So I think Sam might have froze. Ben, what did you make of I feel like we've been throwing this guy's name into everything that's come out because one of our first episodes was him getting fired by ESPN, and now he finally resurfaces in a pretty prominent role, but maybe not as high as we thought he could have gotten.
Yeah, it's a little weird of a fit just in terms of like he is Fox's number 2, but he's a bigger name than Joel Klatt. But I don't know if anybody would think he's a better analyst than Joel Klatt. So you do at least have Fox taking the approach with their college football guys that they didn't take with their pro football guys. So I think that's a unique angle here. But I think it's good. Like I think like he is. I associate him far more with college football than I do the NFL, just because of the way his career ultimately played out. He's one of the greatest college quarterbacks of all time, a Heisman Trophy winner. He's going to Fox, where he is they hold Big 12 rights. He's a Big 12 alum, having spent his college career at Baylor.
Yep.
It was just a matter of time. He was going to wind up somewhere. And so, this happened to be the job that came up open during this carousel. When guys get laid off, like this was the case with Zach Lowe, we never quite know when they're going to re-enter the market because we don't know how much is left on that ESPN deal that typically pays out in full. But the timing appeared to be right. You could kind of tell based on some of his social media behavior that he was kind of itching to get back out there. And I think ultimately, like, this is as good of a role as you probably could have asked for him to bounce back with.
Agreed. I would say college football, whether it was studio or game at ESPN, was the role I liked him best in. So I think that it's a good fit. I don't know if I'm sure he'd love it if he was like the Aikman replacement or something, but I do like when prominent personalities who are good at what they do actually want college football analyst jobs and don't just see it as a fallback or something. And maybe it is a fallback, but at least for now, he's going to be motivated. And that always is refreshing, given that, a lot of guys, it's just the first stepping stone and they're gone before you know it. Maybe he actually stays here for a little while. I would say I'm not surprised Orlovsky didn't take this. This feels like a little lower than you talk a big talk. It's a little tough to resurface as the number 2 on the Little Brother network calling college football, not NFL. Like, I don't know if he would if he could stomach that. He might just rather stay in the same role at ESPN.
Orlovsky is such a part of the NFL machine. Like, it's so hard for me to envision him in college at this point. Like he's just so associated with the NFL to me. Like I have a tough time imagining him going down to college. It just seems like he's a part of kind of the NFL, the ecosystem. Like he's a guy who talks NFL. I just don't, something about that doesn't translate for me. I don't know what it is.
I mean, he came up doing college. I think he was good on it, but yeah, I think most people feel like they graduate, and it's not just that the game, that he's like the number 2 Monday Night Football crew. He also, just like you are saying, he's on all day, every day, talking NFL. So it'd be weird to just leave that behind. But in that same way, RG3 feels like a pretty natural fit for some of those same types of roles. And obviously Fox has a daytime lineup. They sometimes are a little hesitant about the overlap between Fox Sports and FS1, and that's been a mess for a long time. But when you see like Mark Schlereth and others, there is some of that. And the report from The Athletic about RG3 taking this job specifically stated that he's not expected to appear on First Things First or, any of their shows. So did that surprise you? I mean, he has this podcast, but I mean, if I were him, I feel like I would say yes to anything. Maybe they just didn't want him.
Yeah, that was surprising. I'm just trying to think of like what the 1-to-1 would be. And Joel Klatt does do a lot of stuff on the Herd, I know. So I don't know. He has
a weekly hit there for like half an hour. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know how, I think RG3 could do that. I think like he would be probably a good fit for the Herd, and he does have the ability, obviously, to talk NFL and talk college. So I think he'd be a good fit there. He seems like the kind of guest who Colin, typically seems to get the most out of. So I could see that. But yeah, you would think like for a network that like really is kind of lacking in terms of star power across its daytime lineup. Like you would think RG3 would be a little bit more of a natural fit there. So it's curious that he's not going to be.
I guess the only thing there, I don't know where he's based, and obviously FS1 is LA and New York, and so maybe he just is not in a market where that would make sense, and they weren't going to pay him more, so he's not going to travel.
Yeah.
You know, you never know. But speaking of, I read an article, I think Barrett put it out a while ago, when Mark Schlereth took the breakfast ball role, where that man's travel schedule is during football season an absolute nightmare, because he still hosts daytime radio in Denver.
Oh man,
he calls games for the NFL every weekend, and he's in New York to do that show. It's like, it doesn't even, I mean, he does the Denver show from obviously his hotel room and everything, I'm sure, most of the time, but so it can get messy. But I mean, he's very similar to the Emmanuel Acho mold or the LaShawn McCoy mold, Keyshawn Johnson. Like, you feel like RG3 would have been a natural fit on their daytime lineup if he wanted it, but we'll see. Sam, quick thoughts on RG3 to Fox. You're back. What do you think of him resurfacing here as a game analyst?
I mean, I think it's the perfect fit for him, if we're being quite honest here, just to get back on his feet. I think he didn't get overexposed in a role with ESPN. I would push back at that idea, but I think he was at his best when he was an ESPN college football analyst alongside Bob Wischusen in the booth. They kind of let him come outside and show who he is. I mean, I remember him running down the hill at Clemson with Dabo, or him jumping into the ocean in Washington or whatever it was. Where he just they allowed him to be him. And I don't know if necessarily that worked as well in other spots. But I think him with a guy like Jason Benetti, who did.
The world does not want Sam to talk RG3.
Really, it's just somebody that does a good job for college football.
Yeah. No, you're back. You're good. But that's something we didn't mention is Jason Benetti. We can. Jason Benetti is going to be his play-by-play guy. I think that's going to be a great mix. And the other thing that I didn't mention is I was also, when you hear Fox and a prominent person like that, I thought maybe Big Noon Kickoff could be a part of, you can't do both, but I would have guessed that could have been part of the conversations. Maybe he just wants to do games. We'll never know. But Sam gave us a little bit of material there before he dipped out again. Let's go to our hot mics to close things out, where we discuss something that caught our attention, a good or a bad, or just something we want to discuss. I'll start us off here, Ben. Amazon, they do this in flurries, apparently, as they get ready for their NBA coverage this fall, start of an 11-year, multi-billion-dollar package as the basically number 3 broadcaster of NBA games on the new deal. And they already had hired Taylor Rooks, Dirk Nowitzki, and Blake Griffin to be the beginnings of their studio crew. Now they're bringing in Steve Nash to maybe finish it out. I guess we'll see. Mm-hmm. And I'll mention another hire in a moment, but the Dirk relationship, that's going to be really cool. The fact that those two guys played together, are well known to be very close friends, and to bring that type of actual relationship to a desk, that feels like almost a cheat code for this type of setup on a studio panel, especially given we know Amazon with the football side has wanted to kind of be a little more light and goofy at times, more than the other competitors in the NFL space. I mean, those two guys teasing each other, feeding off each other, that feels natural. And Nash has been awesome on the LeBron podcast. So I'm very biased. Steve Nash was my entire childhood as a basketball fan, but I'm pretty excited about this one.
What does this mean for Mind the Game?
Well, I mean, I think what Mind the Game was actually a first step here, because when it came back, it was with Wondery, which is owned by Amazon. And so maybe we should have known. But the other hire was Stan Van Gundy. I was surprised it took this long for Stan to get another gig. I believe so. The Athletic, Andrew Marchand's article reporting this was a little vague on the Harlan side. It
Yeah.
seemed to kind of say that like they're in talks with Harlan, where I feel like the last time we had heard news about Kevin Harlan was like he's on board with Amazon. He's coming over.
Well,
And so that
I wrote the Stan Van Gundy story for us based on Andrew's reporting, and so I was digging
Yeah.
back through that, and like there was some pretty definitive reporting about Kevin Harlan because I was double checking on that too because that stuck out to me as well.
Yeah, so obviously, I mean, Iron Eagles locked in. That's been announced. Harlan would be play-by-play, of course, and I don't think they have a second game analyst. So I don't know. This is all moving a lot slower than I guess I thought it would, but I know many of these folks are actively broadcasting the NBA playoffs right now, so I know that that's part of it. But Van Gundy, I think, is great. I think he's well-respected among NBA people. Obviously, was a coach forever, and the older sports media people, I think, love him. I don't think he's quite he doesn't have the chops of the experience like his brother had and everything. I think sometimes it can feel like I wouldn't even say too casual because he's still really smart, but like almost doesn't fully have the awareness that he's on TV at every moment of the game. And it doesn't always feel like he's broadcasting so much as just talking about the game. So maybe that's what held him back from being one of the first round, but he's more than capable. And they have all three of these companies, ESPN, NBC, and Amazon now, have so much inventory with the new deal that it's not just going to be a number one and a number two team, and that's it. There's so much to fill that I think you got to just bring in capable people, and he's definitely on that list. So we'll see how it goes. But I'm very excited about the studio team. I think Nash, Dirk, Blake, and Taylor Rooks, that feels like the type of like newer blood and different perspective on how to build out a show like that than that I was hoping we would see with the two new players coming in on the new deal.
Yeah, you could even see that clip that went viral, I think at one of the play-in games a few weeks ago where Taylor Rooks and Dirk were it looked like a Snapchat doing Ja Morant celebrations, and the camera caught them doing it with the gun and the hand grenade. And you can just kind of tell the chemistry building there and the energy that show is going to have. And so like, yeah, I think Amazon's crushing it. Like, I think that what they have done is really inspired. I think to your point about it taking so long, like the wild card is probably Richard Jefferson, who's going to be calling the NBA finals for ESPN. You're not going to hear me say a bad thing about Stan Van Gundy. I've been listening to Stan Van Gundy since he was doing guest hosting Tuesdays on the Dan Le Batard show when it was still just a local show in Miami. I think he's the best. He would be a little, I guess, underwhelming if he was their top analyst, but like if you had to do it for a season and then go big game hunting next off season, like I think that's totally acceptable. So I think Amazon's just crushing it.
And we should mention they hired Cassidy Hubbarth too. I don't know if we discussed that on the podcast. I like that they've gone a little, like you can tell it's people that they actually want. They didn't just go we're going to get the top this, that, and this on each network that already exists, and there's our team, and check, we're done. I mean, they did this with football, right? They pulled Kirk Herbstreit. They got a bunch of newcomers. Tony Gonzalez was kind of the only established voice that they hired over, but and Carissa, but you know. And
Al Michaels.
Besides... Well, yeah, which is like the Iron Eagle type thing, right? But besides that, they were pretty creative, and all these analysts bided their time. I think you would say it in the studio. Steve Nash and Dirk and Blake Griffin; those are all guys who have kind of been out there in the wilderness since they retired. They must really want to do this if they're signing on. So I think that is a good sign as well. All right, what do you got, Ben?
So I wrote a column for Awful Announcing on Monday. I've had this idea like percolating in my head under the premise that we aren't talking enough about Bill Belichick and Jordon Hudson and just like how bizarre it is that the greatest football coach of all time, that the next and probably last chapter of his coaching career somewhat involves to some degree, like his 24-year-old girlfriend helping him pull the strings of the North Carolina program. And my premise was like, this should be like an A1 story every day. Well, it looks like I got my wish because after that CBS interview, like this has started to become something we're going to be writing about multiple times a day. We're going to be talking about multiple times a day. That CBS interview, I think, really kind of blew the doors open. Now you have Jordon Hudson. By the time we record this, or by the time you're listening to this, she might have released a statement. She was teasing a statement last I heard on her Instagram, along with a screenshot of an email from Bill Belichick, which was also had Taylor Swift lyrics playing over it. This is wild. I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe this is Bill Belichick, somebody who is notorious, like anti-distraction. Now, like all of this is just like one giant distraction in terms of like his girlfriend, it appears, helping him run his media affairs, helping him run his business affairs, maybe helping him run his college football program. Like and my conclusion in my column was that the reason nobody's talking about this is because it's so difficult to talk about, because you don't know like where their professional relationship ends and where their public relationship ends. But this is just a wild story. I can't believe it's happening.
Yeah, we talked about this the first time through the lens of like what's fair game? Why is this being kind of treated in this other category where less polished up journalism outlets are talking about it more so than the more mainstream traditional places? And I think we had a pretty good conversation about it then, but what's changed that you're hitting on is they're begging for us to talk about it.
Yeah.
Like you do this thing and then you release the most like, I don't even know who to compare him to because it's so played out to throw like right-wing people out there. But the email from Belichick was so like crybaby, reactionary, the media's out to get me, whatever. Of course they would pull out only the I fucked up portions of my book, and that's all they want to talk about. It's like, dude, you were on a softball morning show on CBS. You weren't exactly sitting down with, I mean, pick your hard-hitting interviewer. Like,
yeah, this wasn't Frost Nixon.
Yeah, this wasn't the woman from the Donald Sterling situation sitting down with Diane Sawyer. Like this was about as easy as it gets, and you're still finding a way to turn this into a problem. So it made me. I'm like, okay, Belichick's not a victim here. He's clearly as amped up and ready to go about this as anybody. And if she's supposed to be manicuring his image in the ways that we've kind of seen through these FOIA requests from North Carolina beat reporters, where don't talk about Steve Belichick being a Nepo baby and this and that to try to kind of make things look on the up and up here, she's doing a pretty damn bad job of it too, because interrupting an interview and going viral is about the worst possible way, rather than just letting Bill Belichick go, oh, you know, I'd rather not talk about how we met, but I'm happy. And
they've also told
that's
a
all it
story
would have
about.
taken.
There's also a story out about how they met. Like, I don't know if it's real or not at this point because she was so dismissive of the question, but like, I thought it was public knowledge, public lore that they had met on a flight. They had a chance encounter on a flight and they kept in touch, and then they started dating. Like, I don't, the fact that she shut down that question, like, only leads to more questions now about the nature of their relationship. And so like now it's, not only is it fair game, like if you're a North Carolina college football reporter, this is something you should be talking about like every day. And to your point, like, yeah, like if Bill Belichick all of a sudden, because when you go from the pros to college, you do kind of have to shift your image in terms of recruiting and all of that stuff. And so if Bill all of a sudden was like this fun viral guy and posting memes, and it came out like, oh, this is actually Jordon Hudson's doing, like, yeah, then it'd be like a fun story. But the fact that she has made herself the story and is so seemingly ill-equipped when it comes to these PR matters, when that's what it seems like her focus is in whatever this official or unofficial role is, like, it's just nuts. And I think I said it when we talked about it. Like, I have no doubt that this is going to be a complete disaster at North Carolina. It's to the point where I'm even wondering, like, if he's even going to make it to game one.
Me too. I tweeted that this morning. I said one or both of them is going to be gone by week one.
Yeah. That's a good call. Yeah, that's.
I mean, what are we? This is a bonkers level of distraction and mess, and we're 4.5 months from football.
Yeah, I mean, my other takeaway is every NFL team that passed on him these last 2 years must have done their due diligence on this and must have been like, what the hell is going on here? And then I just can only imagine the amount of buyer's remorse that the University of North Carolina, a Power 5 college football program that like has the ability to play in ACC championship games in the college football playoff, could have hired like a really, really good head coach. Like, and now they're going to have to dig themselves out of this mess inevitably. It's unbelievable.
He does still have that buyout by July 1st, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe that Raiders job will open up again.
Yeah, maybe he's definitely going to go to the NFL now. I think his long game is really working here, where everyone else was the issue, not this mess. It's crazy. I feel like there was a version of the Belichick post retirement story that was very boring and didn't even matter to any of us, and it's gotten so much better than I ever could have dreamed from an entertainment standpoint. Because look, his legacy's also made. I mean, not like rooting for him to do more. He could have retired. He doesn't even need this. So I have no qualms about making fun of it all. It's ridiculous. Imagine being the guy who he's chewed out in the Patriots locker room for this and that over the years, and then you're watching this play out and you're like, oh, I was a distraction, dude.
Yeah. 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 Cause I had like my hoodie up during a team meeting or something. Like,
yeah, I didn't put my phone away quick enough when we were in the film room or whatever. It's hilarious. All right, that'll wrap us up. Hit follow or subscribe if you have not already. We're here for you every single week, breaking down the wild world of sports media. We're also at awfulannouncing.com, covering this stuff minute to minute, all day, every day, as well as across social media, X, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, wherever you are, we will be there as well. We'll catch you next week.